or take Wizard of Oz in this case. Ordinary world is black and white, Kansas. Special world, full color, munchkins, witches, weird characters, gold brick roads, all that. So if somebody just started Wizard of Oz with Dorothy spinning in a house and landing in Wizard of Oz, it would be fantastic, but it wouldn't be super, because we wouldn't have that comparison and contrast between the two.
Basically, not enough backstory to give you a ground to ground you into the storyline as to what's going on.
Right.
It's just like instead of the backstory before Alice stepped through the looking glass, you start the story as she walks through, and you're like scratching your head, going, "What happened before this?"
Yep, exactly. Okay. Exactly.
Or how is it? There's no answer to how is it different from what they're used to.
Right. Right. The ordinary world is the last place the hero came from. So in the case of Westerns where the lone gunman walks into town, his ordinary world was the last town he was in, or the road, the trail that he took from the last town. His ordinary world may not be the 15 towns that he's been in. It's just where he was most recently. What's his most recent experiences before life changes and he's pushed into the special world or willingly enters the special world. Make it as different as possible from the special world. In my case with War Maiden, her ordinary world is being a thief in a city. Her special world is traveling the countryside, fighting these creatures that she's only heard about in fairy tales, and she thought that they didn't even exist until she came across them. So that's my ordinary and my special world that I used.
I haven't read your second thing yet, so don't.
I'm trying not to give away too much.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Ordinary world may be boring, calm, sedate. That's fine, because the true adventure and action of the story happens in the special world, and you want the reader to compare the two. To go, oh, shit, you're not used to that.
Go from a moisture farmer to Jedi.
Yeah, exactly.
Dresden's, the police department, kind of detective.
Karen?
And, and the fairy world.
Right.
Well, you could even go smaller than that. Dresden's apartment versus everything else outside of the apartment.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely, yeah. The ordinary world can foreshadow special events that are going to happen, or certain events that are going to happen in the special world. How you want to do that? Foreshadowing is one of those things that, for me at least, is very hard to do because I always give away too much information. So for those of you so I don't use it much. It's a tool that I don't know how to wield properly. So for those of you that like to do foreshadowing and are good at it, this is a prime opportunity to hint at things that are going to happen in the special world.
but that's another caveat to watch out for voiceover syndrome.
Yes.
For what syndrome?
Voiceover syndrome.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
The ordinary world lets us learn about the hero, both strengths and flaws. And the ordinary world sets up the initial, not all of, but the initial inner and outer problems of the hero. So in Star Wars, when Luke's in the ordinary world, hanging out on the moisture farm, what's his problem? What does he want? What's his
bored.
He's bored. Yeah. Well, what's his goal?
He wants to join the academy.
Academy.
Exactly. So obviously that changes, but so that sets up a baseline of what does the hero want. Then we're talking about entrances next. How does the hero enter your story? In the case of my book, she's jumping from rooftop to rooftop and steals some stuff from a rich guy. It's the first impressions. It sets up for what the hero is and is not capable of, what their attitudes are. The key thing is, what are they doing? What action are they taking at the moment of entrance? Stan, in your book, The Treachery of Zethus, I think the hero is the guy who was going to be the new First Lord. He went out and became the hermit. At least that's my impression from what I've read of it so far.
Yeah.
So what is he doing when he enters stage? When the curtains open, he's farming. He's tending his herb garden. Or maybe he's inside, but he's got that herb garden. He's a hermit. He's by himself. That's his ordinary world. That's his setup. That's where he's coming from. Him being trained as a wizard first, and could be the first sovereign, or the sovereign, or whatever it was, and so on and so forth. That's his backstory. But his backstory is not his ordinary world. Does everybody follow me so far? So, because we never learned what happened to Luke Skywalker's parents in the first 3 movies.
I know who his father is.
Well, yeah, by the time End of the Empire Strikes Back comes around,
I know.
and even that's in doubt. Maybe Vader's just lying to him. So during the first movie, if that had been the only movie made, and no books, no franchise, no more movies made, we would have never known.
That's right, because that didn't happen until the next movie. So.
Right.
Okay.
Right. All we know is that Obi-Wan told him his father was a great Jedi fighter,
Yeah.
or warrior, or whatever.
And a good friend.
And a good friend, yes. So we just know he was raised by aunt and uncle. That's backstory. That's not ordinary world. You guys see the distinction between the two? What I'm trying to prevent is you guys doing a big info dump of backstory and saying, well, I'm setting up the ordinary world. No, you're info dumping backstory on us. The backstory should come out as the book progresses.
Okay.
We kind of covered that. So the stakes. The ordinary world sets up what's at stake for the hero, and then the herald shows up, changes everything. His old wants, desires, needs, the hero's old wants, desires, needs go out the window, and new ones are dropped on his lap. And that's what's going to force him out of the ordinary world and to take that jump into the special world.
So, in my book,
The horse is the
the
herald.
horse longbow is the hero.
Yes, absolutely.
So you didn't know that, did you?
I didn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
It seems
So,
like a lot of this stuff kind of comes naturally as you're writing a story. You're doing
Yes.
it without really thinking about
absolutely.
it.
If you've read a lot, which my advice to you is read a lot. I mean, don't just focus on writing. And I'm not talking about reading books like this. I'm talking fictional books. Because you see how they do it, and you just naturally follow those examples. So if you really want to write horror, read a lot of horror and follow their examples and see how they do it. Emulation is a great way of learning. Eventually you will find your own voice and your own style out of a mix of all the different things that you've read.
But go outside of your genres also. Because
Oh,
if
yeah,
you want to
for
write
stuff.
horror, but you have a romantic interest, read some romance so you know how to do that correctly.
Correct.
Because otherwise it's stilted and
Yep.
So you can put that in
Uninteresting.
your horror stories.
Yep. Yeah, because Jim Butcher's wife is a romance writer. So when he hits his romance scenes, he basically hands the manuscript to his wife and says, help.
And that's how he so successfully breeds the tension between Harry and Karen.
Yep, and Susan.
And
Well,
Susan.
until
And the little girl.
recently.
As someone else do it for him. Hearing aids.
But that's how he creates the tension, is by going outside of his genre.
Yeah. Let's see here. The ordinary world also brings in relevant details, and I underline that word because it's just what is relevant to this scene, this point in time, about their history class upbringing, so on and so forth. So, if you do too much of this, you get the voiceover happening, and you don't want that. And then lastly, the theme. What single idea is the story about? That is established in the ordinary world, but it may shift and change subtly throughout the course of the story. Any questions over the ordinary world before we go to the call to adventure, which is what happens when the herald shows up? So, when the herald shows up, well, first off, the ordinary world plants the seeds for change and growth, but they're not germinated, they're not fertilized, they're not watered. The herald does that when he shows up on scene. Gets those seeds to start to grow, gets things starting to change and become different. To get the story rolling, there's different ways of doing it. It could be a messenger or some mystical message showing up, or it could be an electronic transmission or an email. It was Patrick's story where his guy was woken up by some admiral of,
Right.
we need you to go to Mars now. No, don't pack your stuff, go to Mars now. That's a herald. That's an electronic message coming in, it's a conversation, and off he goes. It could be a major event, could just be an internal stirring. In my own personal life story, I'm the hero. My internal stirring was to get the hell out of Texas. And through a couple of bounces around the nation, I ended up here. Or it could just be the hero gets fed up with the status quo. The hero can be the trickster, doesn't like the status quo, wants to change it, so they put forth monumental effort to change it and make life better.
Do you mind I wrote that down? Get the hell out.
JT, I notice a lot of this is very polymorphous. I mean, like, one thing fits into something else, or it could be this or that. Or
Absolutely.
So-
That's why this is not a formula that must be followed from step A to step Z.
okay.
So, who here knows the difference between cooking and baking? I figured you'd raise your hand. Yeah, the ladies, obviously, but
What's the difference between cooking? They're both cooking, aren't they?
No.
Well, there's two types of women I know.
Cooking, you can throw stuff together in different amounts. You don't have to measure anything. Baking is very, very precise. If you don't have exactly the right amount of flour to the exact right amount of baking powder, it ain't going to come out. But if you put in a little bit too much tomato sauce in the stew, so what? It still tastes good.
This is cooking, not baking.
I see.
When I make my beer, because I do home brewing, as most of you know, when I pull out the recipe,
Did you bring it?
no, I shouldn't. When I pull out the recipe, it calls for this many ounces of this kind of hops to be added to the boil at this time period, at 20 minutes in or 35 minutes in. Or
So that's
whatever.
baking.
No,
Oh.
I can be off by 2 minutes.
Oh.
It'll suddenly change the flavor of the beer, but you still get good beer.
Oh. So it's
I don't
cooking.
have like a gram scale because the hops comes in 2 ounce bags. Usually it calls for half an ounce here, an ounce there. Rarely do you ever throw in 2 ounces all at once. I suppose you could, but recipes I follow don't specify that. So I don't take my 2 ounces of hops and measure, oh, I have half an ounce now, I'll put that in. Oh, I have an ounce now, I'll put that in. I dump it into a bowl, or dump it on the counter, and I go, okay, there's about my halfway point, there's an ounce over there, so I need a half an ounce, so I'm going to take this about half of the way much, split it in half, roughly, and go from there, because it's cooking. It's not a precise, formulaic chemistry experiment.
I'll be dang. Okay.
So,
Fiction writing is cooking. Technical writing is baking.
yes.
Oh, okay.
How
Okay.
about that?
Yeah.
Sure.
There you go. So that's
And I don't cook, so I'm confused.
So that's why when I say, or honestly when anybody says, I don't care who they are, says, thou shalt do it this way, take that as, yeah, I might do it. You should be doing this, you usually do that. That's how I try to phrase my suggestions. Because nothing's set in stone except for maybe grammatical structure of a sentence and spelling and punctuation.
But speaking as an editor, understand these rules before you go breaking
Yes,
something?
yes. If you break a rule, make a conscious decision to break it.
That's why we have.
Do it on purpose and do it well. You have to do it well.
Do you know who Terry Bisson is, don't you?
Now
He wrote Bears Discover Fire.
Okay.
Anyway, never mind. But anyway, basically he has on his website, he has like these 60 things that he's learned, for writing short science fiction stories. And
Oh, okay.
do this, and I disagree with like about 3/4 of it.
There you go. Yeah.
So, but maybe he knows something that I don't.
Maybe you know something he doesn't.
Okay.
So,
All right.
yeah. To each their own, really.
Some of it's just plain point of view,
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
from looking at it from this angle
I mean,
versus looking at it from your angle.
Sorry, I didn't mean to tangentialize everything here.
That's cool. No, it's good stuff. So, the Call to Adventure.